Hey everybody, and Tony here with my review of Verdi's Aida with conductor Leonardo Sini, which I saw at the Deutsche Oper Berlin. This marks the third time I saw Verdi's Aida at the Deutsche Oper Berlin because I wanted to see and hear Byung Gil Kim, who I've been following for many years, sing the role of Ramfis. Ever since I first saw and heard him in some select character parts, i.e. Antonio from Il Viaggio a Rams by Rossini, I have seen his career grow from strength to strength, especially since he started to sing a lot more leading male roles such as Raimondo from Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor, as well as the four villains Landorf, Coppelius, Dr. Miracle, and Dappertutto from Offenbach's Le Comte of Man. And while he still continues to perform character parts to this very day, he manages to combine his performances of those roles with some leading man roles. And as I heard him tonight as Ramfis, I was quite impressed to hear how strong his voice has been growing, as well as how he kept that sort of crudeness and that type of metal and steel that he had in his voice that made him stand out quite well, and also gave it an ambiguous and interestingly ambiguous and grayish color that makes him accessible for many anti-heroic roles as well as villainous roles. In fact, that is what I've noticed about Byung Gil Kim's voice every time he opens his mouth to sing. Yes, Byung Gil Kim specializes in a lot of the bass baritone and basso cantante roles in opera. And what I've noticed about his voice is that crudeness also brings out a certain menace to each of the characters that he sings, as well as a sort of virility and strength that manages to make each of them stand out well. Yes, his voice is not as dark or as voluminous, let alone as rich and cavernous, such as my personal favorite Ramfis's, including the likes of Jose Mardones, Ezio Pinza, Alexander Kipnis, Herbert Alsen, Ludwig Weber, Gottlob Frick, Kurt Böhme, Giulio Neri, Joseph Greindl, Raffaele Arie, Roberto Silva, Jerome Hines, Giorgio Tozzi, Cesare Sieppi, Nikolai Gyaurov, Bonaldo Giaiotti, Evgeny Nesterenko, and Hans Zotin. And I'm sure that Byung Gil Kim could also learn a few things from Ezio Pinza, Alexander Kipnis, Jerome Hines, Giorgio Tozzi, Cesare Sieppi, Nikolai Gyaurov, and Bonaldo Giaiotti in terms of how a proper bass should sound when singing Ramfis. But what Byung Gil Kim managed to do with Ramfis was use that crudeness in his voice to make this priest ambiguously sighted, but also somebody that nobody should ever mess with, because there is an imposing quality that is present with Byung Gil Kim's voice, and I would love to see and hear him further develop his voice and further strengthen his basso cantante / bass baritone voice, because Byung Gil Kim is certainly somebody who could sing Filippo II, Don Giovanni, Mephistopheles, Padre Guardiano, Sparafucile, Ferrando from Il Trovatore, Colline from La Bohème, both Marcel and Le Comte de Saint-Prix from Les Huguenots, Bertram from Robert le Diable, Boris Godunov, Prince Gremin from Evgeny Onegin, Prince Ivan Kovansky from Kovanschina, Fasolt from Das Rheingold, Hans Sachs from Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg, König Heinrich der Vogler from Lohengrin, König Marke from Tristan und Isolde, and many other great roles for a basso cantante. Although Byung Gil Kim does not really reach those cavernous depths of a true basso profondo a la Giulio Neri, or even that of Gottlob Frick or Kurt Böhme, let alone Joseph Greindl, he was still in a class of his own in terms of using that crudeness to his advantage to make make Ramfis a sufficiently imposing character, and using that said vocal crudeness to stand strong above the rest of the singers of the evening. So I still have to give major props to Byung Gil Kim in terms of his crude yet strong performance as Ramfis, and I hope to see a lot more of him in leading man roles, because there is a Don Giovanni, a Mephistopheles, a Philip II, and even a Don Quixote waiting for him in the future. So I really hope that he does take advantage of those opportunities to further strengthen his voice to the best of his abilities. And here's also hoping that a lot more exciting opportunities will wait for him. And here's also hoping that he will grab said opportunities all guns blazing. Tobias Kira was yet another strong vocal performer as the King of Egypt. And I also heard him in that same role about 8 years ago, and he was still as strong as ever. Here, he actually grew in vocal strength and was one of the many singers who proved that with time and with diligence and with further development, he definitely reached those heights to the best of his abilities. While I can never get the likes of Plinio Clabasi, Hans Zotin, or Eugenio Rico out of my ears because of their signature cavernous voices, Tobias Kira was still sufficiently strong and formidable as the king, and I also salute him with all of my heart and all of my mind and all of my soul for everything that he was able to accomplish as this particular pharaoh of Egypt. So he rightfully deserves that huge bravo that he was entitled to. Jordan Shanahan was sufficiently strong and sufficiently virile as Amonasro, also using that crudeness and that roughness and that toughness in his virile sounding baritone voice to bring out the best out of this Ethiopian king. And there was also that raw energy that I heard in his voice that he managed to make it ring throughout the theater. And that rawness also provided emotional depth as well as desperation to make Amonasro a lot more human, but also a lot more urgent in his actions throughout the opera. Yes, there has been no shortage of baritones who are a million times greater as Amonasro, such as Domenico Viglione Borghese, Benvenuta Franci, Mattia Battistini, Titta Ruffo, Riccardo Stracciari, Anselmo Colciani, Apollo Granforte, Carlo Tagliabue, Gino Becchi, Tito Gobbi, Giuseppe Taddei, Cornel McNeil, Gian Giacomo Guelfi, Giuseppe Scandolla, Giuseppe De Luca, Giuseppe Danise, George London, Hans Hotta, Josef Metternich, and even Walter Beri, because their voices were far more voluminous and far more virile than what Jordan Shanahan could produce vocally, but Jordan Shanahan was also in a class of his own in terms of his own take. There was that raw desperation in his voice that made Amonasro anti-heroic as a character. And there was also that sufficient vocal virility that made him present as both a singer and as an overall performer. So I also have to give my hat off to Jordan Shanahan for a job well done. Jorge Puerta was a solidly sung and technically secure Radames, although he did show signs of tiredness in the later parts of the opera before recuperating in the very final moments, especially with his final duet with Aida, with Amneris chiming in. What I love about Jorge Puerta was that he was able to take great advantage of his chest tones, and they were full chest tones at that. He did not skimp out on them, and he also made sure that those chest tones made his top notes as well as everything that he sang be well produced and well modulated without any wobbles and without any problems in the higher register. Yes, his voice does lack that signature sword-like, piercing, incisive, and diamond-cut quality that I love in many Helden tenors, dramatic tenors, or even spinto tenors singing Radames, although if you ask me, I always love it when I hear a Helden tenor sing Radames, and voices that come to my mind in terms of Radames are Lauritz Melchior, Max Lorenz, Bernd Aldenhoff, Ludwig Suthaus, Karel Burian, Mario Filippeschi, Giuseppe Borgatti, Isidoro Fagaoga, Aureliano Pertile, Mario del Monaco, Franco Corelli, James King, John Vickers, Gianfranco Cecchelle, unless I forget about Galliano Massini, Giovanni Zenatello, Giovanni Martinelli, and my all-time favorite Radames, Enrico Caruso. Those were tenors, whether they be Helden tenors or dramatic tenors whose voices were secure, incisive, shining, brilliant, virile, manly, masculine, and absolutely muscular voices that I love in Radames. And these are attributes that I believe make Radames come alive as a character as well as an overall person, because he does need to have that heroism in his voice. Yes, Jorge Puerta was technically secure, but it still cannot be denied that he is essentially a full lyric tenor tackling such a huge and dramatic role. But that is not to trivialize his great contributions as a singer. Although he showed tiredness in the later parts of the opera, I could forgive all that because that was quite the dent to pay for what was otherwise a valiant job that he was able to pull off as Radames. His voice managed to have sufficient technical security throughout all the registers. And although he was drowned out by the orchestra and the chorus, he still managed to give it his all, and he was able to be as committed and dedicated as a performer as he's always been ever since I first saw and heard him as Gabriele Adorno. So I still hope that he will continue to go from strength to strength, but with the right repertoire. I see him more as an Edgardo singer, a Rodolfo singer, as well as somebody who is far more capable of singing Carlo from I Masnadieri, Rodolfo from Luisa Miller, and even Pinkerton from Madama Butterfly. These are roles that are far more suitable for Jorge Puerta instead of something as grand and huge as Radames. Although he did a fine job with Radames in terms of using those chest tones to power his voice really well, I would recommend him to leave Radames for the real dramatic tenors, let alone the real Helden tenors, because any true Helden tenor could manage to bring out the virility and that muscular quality that makes Radames the hero that he is. Full of valiance, full of manliness, full of virility, full of strength, but also a man first and foremost. Despite my caveats, I still have to give it up for Mr. Jorge Puerta for what he was able to accomplish as Radames in terms of bringing his technically secure, full lyric tenor voice to great use. Ya-Chung Huang was absolutely stirring, sufficiently virile, as well as emotionally charged as the messenger. And it was all thanks to his signature light lyric / full lyric tenor voice that managed to make him so superb in that particularly ungrateful role, and he managed to pull the stops off very well with everything that he's got. Although, if you ask me, I prefer a much fuller voice as the messenger, such as James McCracken in his prime, Nicola Martinucci, as well as Johannes Zembach. Those are voices I would associate with the messenger because these were voices that were far more virile and stronger, but I still have to give it to Ya-Chung Huang in terms of what he was able to pull off as the messenger. I have been rather on the fence these days with Anna Smirnova as Amneris, ever since she has been taking on more dramatic soprano roles such as Turandot, Abigail, Lady Macbeth, Brunhilde, and even the dramatic coloratura soprano role of Oda Bella, I've noticed that her voice became a lot more inconsistent even when she was singing her signature role Amneris. She did have chest tones in certain places, but in many other places, there were times that she resorted to singing in collapsed head voice, which is such a huge shame because there were many places where she could have and should have sung completely full chest, because the chest tones are where the money is in terms of Amneris, as well as what makes her judgment scene absolutely thrilling to listen to. The one aspect about her voice that still remains are her top notes. And of course, that round color that made her stand out well, although she should have taken a lot more advantage with her chest tones and really developed them if she is to make Amneris stand out so well. Even dramatic sopranos of the past, such as Edith Walker, Anna von Mildenburg, Mata Fuchs, Gertrud Rünger, Ella von Nemeti, Annika Netzny, Helena Braun, Erna Schlüter, Margaret Harshaw, Rossi Deli, Astrid Varnay, who, mind you, also performed this role in Chicago back in 1955 alongside Renata Tebaldi as Aida, Ingrid Stiga, Sigrid Kehl, Shirley Verrett, although she did bill herself as a mezzo-soprano, but she's always been a natural soprano, Grace Bumbry, who was yet another mezzo-soprano who also sang soprano roles, Janice Martin, and even Isolde Eichlepp had far more developed chest tones than Anna Smirnova could ever have, and as I stated before, these were dramatic sopranos who also sang Amneris. Oh, and lest I forget, probably the most favorite one being Gena Dimitrova, who although sang Aida in the 70s and the early 80s, was way better as Amneris when she sang this role in La Scala and many other opera houses of the world. In fact, I would even argue that Gena Dimitrova is actually one of my most favorite dramatic sopranos who sang Amneris alongside Astrid Varnay, Gertrud Rünger, Martha Fuchs, Ella von Nemeti, Helena Braun, Ingrid Stiga, Sigrid Kehl, Shirley Verrett, and Grace Bumbry. And in terms of true mezzos who sang Amneris complete with round, rich chest tones, you can never ever go wrong with the likes of Ebe Stignani, Gianna Pederzini, Elena Nicolai, Giulietta Simeonato, Irene Mendini Cataneo, Bruna Castagna, Maria Capuana, Bianca Berini, Bruna Baglioni, Stefania Toscisca, and even mezzo-sopranos who sound more like sopranos but still have good chest tones, such as Fiorenzo Cosotto, Viorizza Cortez, and Eva Randova. And if we're talking about darker mezzo-sopranos with far greater and stronger and mightier chest tones, look no further than the likes of Oralia Dominguez and Elena Obraztsova. Whether these old school singers of Amneris such as Astrid Varnay, Rossi Deli, or even Ingrid Stiga or Sigrid Kehl, let alone mezzo-sopranos with real chest tones such as Ebe Stignani, Gianna Pederzini, Giuseppina Zinetti, Elena Obraztsova, and probably the greatest of all time, arguably in my opinion, Oralia Dominguez, these singers could actually eat Anna Smirnova alive in terms of their volcanic vocalism. With Anna Smirnova, what I also noticed about her was the inconsistencies that she has been having with her voice. There were times that she sounded unsupported in the middle notes and in the lower notes, and there were times that she had them, but there were occasions in which she completely forgot about them. And it's quite bothersome because Anna Smirnova does have good material to work with, but her voice was really inconsistent. But even with those inconsistencies, at least her top notes were reliable. And I'm sure that she could take further advantage of those top notes with roles such as Isolde, Elektra, and even the Dyer's Wife, unless I forget about Marie from Wozzeck, as well as the Foreign Princess from Rusalka, because these are roles that I would argue are much more suitable for Anna Smirnova, especially since she has been singing all of these big dramatic soprano roles far more than the dramatic mezzo role of Amneris. So regardless of Anna Smirnova's reliable top, her vocal inconsistencies marred her overall performance as Amneris. Equally as disappointing was Dinara Alieva as Aida. Although I did like that seemingly full color in her voice, and although there was a certain sweetness to her voice, I felt like she was way too lyrical for this particular role, which is supposed to be a lot more dramatic. And of course, as I would argue, may as well be for a soprano assoluta. I did try to like Dinara Alieva ever since I first saw and heard her as Violetta Valerie from La Traviata. While I did like how she was able to let her voice ring throughout the orchestra, there was just something inconsistent about her voice in terms of pushing for those high notes to let them come out. And it's also marred by an overly demanding repertoire that she tries too hard to sing. Yes, there are the full lyric soprano roles of Neda from Pagliacci and Liu from Turandot, which I would argue should have been her bread and butter throughout her career. But with her taking on more demanding roles such as Violetta from Traviata, Elisabetta from Don Carlo, and even Aida, there's just something completely missing. And probably the most egregious issue with Dinara Alieva as Aida is the complete lack of chest tones and complete lack of core. Even if she tries to sing her low notes, they sound so aspirated and completely devoid of any depth and any vocal acting that it just comes off as a total vocal disappointment. Yes, her voice does sound nice, especially in some of the high notes and some of the middle notes. But every time she tries to sing more emotionally, it's like something is holding her back from doing so. And it's a huge shame because she does have nice material to work with, but not really a reliable technique to save her. It says something that the likes of Maria Nemeth, Emi Destin, Rose Pauli, Janina Arangi Lombardi, Maria Caniglia, Tsinka Milanov, Margareta Teschemacher, Hilda Zadek, Renata Tebaldi, Maria Curtis Verna, Carla Martinez, Leonie Rezenek, Ingrid Biona, Birgit Nilsson, Dame Gwyneth Jones before she started to fully commit herself with more dramatic soprano roles, and Elena Suliotes had far more reliable techniques and far more steel in their voices, unless I forget about the more beautiful singing to be found in Camilla Williams, Leila Gencher, Leontine Price in her prime, Gilda Cruz Romo, and even to some extent Maria Chiara, unless I forget about the complete packages, the soprano assolutas who also had a high E flat when they sang that in the triumphal scene, including Adelina Patti, Angela Peralta, Maria Callas, who was the greatest Aida to have ever hit that high E flat in the triumphal scene, Marissa Galvani, Adelaida Negri, and Aprile Milo. But out of all these sopranos I mentioned, if I wanted some steel in the voice, I could never ever go wrong with Tsinka Milanov. And if I wanted dramatic intensity, I would never go wrong with Rosa Poncela. If I want the complete package, especially with those high notes, I would ultimately go for Maria Callas because she really had everything from those chest tones to the super high notes to all that vocal acting that made Maria Callas, in my opinion, the greatest interpreter of Aida of all time. Unfortunately, with Dinara Alieva, she was completely devoid of any vocal acting that was going on with her voice, and the only thing that is left of her voice is a full lyric soprano voice that had a nice color to it, but nothing more. There is not a lot of vocal acting that she tried to do with her voice, although she had a fine stage presence to boot, but that's not enough to save her. If Dinara Alieva worked on those chest tones and really took advantage of them and even engaged with those said chest tones, she would have been much better as Aida. But as she was a letdown, and I think she just really needs to prioritize more on the full lyric soprano roles instead of trying to push her luck with more spinto soprano roles such as Aida as well as Elisabetta di Valois. She may as well just stick to the likes of Mimi, Neda, and Liu and just call it a day. Leave Aida to the real spinto sopranos, let alone the real soprano assolutas and dramatic sopranos with great top notes and good chest tones. Just don't touch Aida anymore. I really beg of Dinara Alieva to no longer touch Aida. At least with Sua Jo as the high priestess, she managed to make use of her fine and lovely lyric soprano voice to make the priestess come to life. And while there are arguably stronger performers in this role, such as Eugenia Ratti, Katia Ricciarelli, before she ended up destroying her voice with much heavier roles, and even the likes of Joan Sutherland and Kiri Tekanawa in their primes, Sua Jo was still a solidly fine lyric soprano who managed to make great use of her voice to make the priestess come alive. So while the singing, especially in terms of the two leading ladies, i.e. Anna Smirnova as Amneres and Dinara Alieva as Aida, left a lot to be desired, it was ultimately the lower voiced men, specifically Byung Gil Kim's crude yet strong Ramfis, Tobias Kira's virile, handsome, and super strong king of Egypt, and Jordan Shanahan showing superb endurance as Amonasro, as these three gentlemen managed to make the evening great. And while I can certainly give my hat off to Byung Gil Kim as Ramfis, Tobias Kira as the King of Egypt, and Jordan Shanahan as Amonasro, I could still give some kudos to Jorge Puerta for his valiant work as Radames, although I do feel that his voice wasn't really that suitable for singing something as dramatic and steely as this role. But ultimately, among the tenors, I still have to give my hat off to Ya-Chung for what he was able to accomplish as the messenger. And Sua Jo's sweet lyric soprano voice was quite lovely to listen to as the high priestess. But ultimately, it was Byung Gil Kim's, Tobias Kira's, and Jordan Shanahan's evening for some awesome singing, and I salute them for everything that they did, especially Byung Gil Kim, because I would love to see this gentleman keep on growing as a singer, especially with all the leading male roles to come, and of course, further develop his technique the best way he can. The conducting done by Leonardo Sini was solid all throughout. It was sufficiently exciting, although there were occasions in which the brass tended to override the rest of the orchestra, and there were occasions in which there was a false start, especially in the judgment scene, but at least he exudes the electricity and the energy that he passes on to the orchestra and to the chorus, and everything that he did as a conductor. And what more can I say about the chorus and orchestra of the Deutsche Oper Berlin? Not only are they totally reliable in what they've done, but they've proven themselves to further strengthen every single performance they are in. So overall, with strong performances, especially from the three lower voiced male roles, with Byung Gil Kim and Tobias Kira standing head and shoulders above the rest of the competition, followed by Jordan Shanahan, these three gentlemen further strengthened the performance of Aida with everything they've got. And while I was not a huge fan of Anna Smirnova as Amneres and Dinara Alieva as Aida, I could still give them some credit for what they were able to do with those roles in terms of their skills as actresses, but their voices left a lot to be desired. Nevertheless, it was Jorge Puerta who also kept the evening going with his endurance and, of course, with what he was able to do with his secure technique. And let's not forget about what Ya-Chung and Sua Jo accomplished with their small roles of the messenger and the priestess. The singing, although it was hit and miss from some of the mains, it was still as strong as ever, especially if you have three lower voiced male singers such as Byung Gil Kim, Tobias Kira, and Jordan Shanahan accomplishing everything they can to make the evening great. And for those of you who watched this particular production of Verdi's Aida at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, what'd you think of it? Did you really love Byung Gil Kim, Tobias Kira, and Jordan Shanahan as Ramfis, the King, and Amonasro respectively? Was there a lower voice male singer that you really loved? Whether it be Byung Gil Kim, Tobias Keita, or Jordan Shanahan? Was there a singer from the three main leads that you liked, whether it be Jorge Puerta, Anna Smirnova, or Dinara Alieva? Or did you feel like the singing was totally inadequate to your ears? Please comment below and let me know. Well, that's it for my review of Verdi's Aida starring Byung Gil Kim as Ramfis. Tune in tomorrow for my review of, once again, Verdi's La Forza del Destino, also at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, starring Ante Iarkunitsa as Padre Guardiano. So until then, good night everybody and happy Black Saturday.